So I've come to suggest today that when we're in chapter 37 of our experiences, we must be careful not to judge our circumstances too quickly. Somebody said, what's chapter 37? Chapter 37 is when the world unraveled around Joseph. When everything started falling apart. Y'all ain't saying nothing. When the bottom fell out and all hell broke loose. If Joseph had misdiagnosed what God was up to in chapter 37, he never would have made it to chapter 50. Oh, but because he knew that was a promise. You ought to just look at somebody and say, I'm glad I got a promise. I'm so glad God made me a promise. And his promise is that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Grab somebody's hand and say, don't quit too quick. Don't misdiagnose what God is up to. Because just when you think that God has taken his hands off you, that's when God is working behind the scenes, rearranging stuff, turning things around. You ought to jump to your feet and give him some praise that he's still turning stuff around. He still can shift. He's still in the business of moving things, rearranging things. Look at somebody and say, I've been through some stuff that didn't make sense. It didn't make sense when they sold Joseph in slavery. It didn't make sense when he was accused of sexual harassment. It didn't make sense when Potiphar's wife had him thrown in prison. It didn't make sense when the cupbearer forgot Joseph. And some of you under the sound of my voice have been through some situations that don't make sense. The divorce didn't make sense. The affair didn't make sense. The unfair termination didn't make sense. The embarrassment didn't make sense. The wedding that didn't happen didn't make sense. The loss of a loved one didn't make sense. The abuse you endured didn't make sense. The baby conceived by your spouse while you were still married, it didn't make sense. The promotion somebody else got when you should have received it, it didn't make sense. The injustice you suffered, it didn't make sense. The neglect by your parents, it didn't make sense. The abandonment didn't make sense. The rejection didn't make sense. Oh, but you ought to throw your head back and give God some praise for providence that my life is tied to a God who's still in charge. Is there anybody here that can thank God that even when I can't see his hand, I can trust his heart? You ought to open your mouth and give God some praise and tell God thank you for providence. Just find 3 people and tell them I thank God for providence. Come on, tell somebody. If you don't get anything else, if you don't remember the scripture, if you don't remember the text, if you don't remember the title, open your mouth and clap your hands and give God praise for providence. I'm so glad that in all things, oh shucks here, God works together for the good of them that love God, that those that are called according to his purpose. You ought to look at your neighbor and say, in other words, what I'm trying to tell you is but God. Anybody here got a but God praise? Anybody here got a but God testimony? Anybody here got a but God shout? Got a but God dance? Do I have any company in here? You ought to throw your head back and say, but God. But God is how Jacob, how Paul was delivered from a jail. But God is how Rahab, a harlot, entered in the family of Jesus Christ. But God is how the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. But God is how you're still here, still got your right mind, still got a praise, still got a shout, still got your life. Is there anybody in here that can grab your neighbor by the hand and say, this shout is not because I ain't been through hell, but this shout is because I lived through it and I came to tell you about it. Why don't you praise him? Why don't you bless him? Why don't you shout? Let the redeemed of the Lord say yes. 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 You ought to praise him. Where my witnesses at? Where my praisers at? Look at somebody and say, I'm so glad that I didn't die in chapter 37. I'm so glad that I stuck around for the conclusion of the whole matter. And it does not yet appear what I'm gonna be. Hey, but when God gets through with me, I'm coming forth like pure gold. You ought to bless him. You ought to praise him. You ought to give him glory. Shout yes in here. Yes. Yes.